Tithes and offerings are intended to be acts of worship, where we are disciplined in giving to God out of what God has given to us. We're disciplined in giving. Paul says on the first day of the week, he's giving them instruction on this particular time, set this aside. And so also we see here that this church was likely then gathering on Sunday. Sunday was considered the first day of the week. And in line with that, they'd set aside a portion to give in proportion to how they had been blessed. And we know that for each believer, this is different. In Scripture, we can see a biblical basis for a tithe of 10% out of one's earnings. But throughout Scripture, we see that there are times when it was much more than that. For each believer, it's different. But if you have income, if there is money coming in, what Scripture encourages is to give back in proportion to that. Have you been blessed with much? Well, then give more. And listen, there's testimonies from many who have been blessed mightily, and as led by the Lord, they've been able to recognize that they only need this much to live well, and the rest they give away. And so when Paul says give in proportion here, he's saying just that. Give in proportion to how you've been blessed. In some cases, giving more and more. And so we see here then some specific instruction to us as believers that throughout Scripture there is evidence of giving, but it's giving to God. It's important to note that. The tithe, that is a gift from the first fruits of your labor. That is, you get paid for a job, and the first thing you do is to take a portion of that and say, this is for the Lord. And look, it's interesting. Here's just a little bit of a side note. It's interesting that for Paul, remember in the scriptures, or in the letter rather, there was no chapter break. We've sort of done that. And so for us, there's a distance of time between what we considered in chapter 15 and now coming back a week later, we're dealing with chapter 16. But for them, as they read the letter, as Paul wrote the letter, he would have gone from this valedictory, this great exhortation and declaration of how Jesus is alive. And because of that, we are victorious over death. And he goes right from there into, and now I want you to take an offering to bless the church. And so we do see that it is connected to what God has done for us. And so then, in the context of the church, you give to God by giving to your church community. And then that goes to the work of the ministry. But it's your response to what God has done for you. Now, there is a difference between tithes and offerings. Tithes are what you give out of what you have received, and offerings are something that is above and beyond the tithe. It's often a special collection for other matters. And this is all part of your worship, of your surrender to God. It's between you and the Lord. And so then for church leaders, this is important because this informs how we treat these things at Calvary Chapel. Paul said, make sure the collection is taken before I come. Now, we don't know necessarily all of the reasons for why Paul suggested this, but we can make, I think, pretty fair speculation, and that is that Paul did not want to influence the body or to compel them. Imagine, if you will, Paul comes in and he says, okay, now I'm going to take up the collection, and he begins going around to each individual believer. And people are thinking, well, gosh, now Paul, an apostle, he's collecting the money. I better put some extra in the basket. For all sorts of reasons, maybe so I can be in good favor with Paul as he's taking the collection, or I don't want to be, seen by Paul as being cheap, or whatever the case may be. But at Calvary, you know that we don't pass the plate. We don't seek to compel you to give. We want that to be a work of the Lord. Goodness, we don't really even talk about money much and tithing unless it comes up in Scripture. And here's an important thing to note. Look, as the pastor, as the senior pastor here at Calvary Northeast, I don't see the tithe detail. I know our finances, I know the totals, I know whether we can pay our bills, but I don't see which of you give and which of you don't. So that our relationship is never influenced or impacted by these things. But I hope you do. I hope you do give because the Lord blesses those who do in obedience to his word. And here's the thing, he uses you. He uses you to meet some of the needs in this fellowship, in this body. He's designed it that way. I think we could all agree that we serve a powerful God, a mighty, sovereign creator God, and if he wanted to, he could put a whole lot of money in our bank account if he needed to. But he hasn't. He hasn't done it that way. He's established an order in Scripture. And I think it's because it's part of our discipleship. It's part of our sanctification. It's learning how to trust him. With every gift, even, we give a little bit of our selfishness away. Because look, and here's the other thing. This offering, we can't miss this. The offering that Paul was taking, it was going to the Jews. Do you understand this? It was going to the Jewish believers in Jerusalem. So to state this differently, money was coming into Jerusalem to support Jewish believers from the Gentiles. Do you see? You see what's happening in this gospel community? Dividing lines are being broken down. Gentile churches all over the surrounding areas, and you better believe that Paul was excited about this for that very reason. Historically, they hated one another. But now the Gentiles are coming to the aid of the Jews. And based off of what Paul wrote in Romans, he's also saying, and you owe it to them. You owe it to the Jews. Because in their blindness, the gospel's gone forth to you. And so you see, it wasn't just meeting a material need, it was creating unity in the gospel community that Paul was part of forming. Giving goes so much further than even the material need.